Eat all your veggies, or the morco will get you. Sound familiar? Well, the monster probably doesn't unless you're Finnish, but the sentiment is there. The boogeyman, or boogie monster, is a type of mythic creature used by adults to frighten children into good behavior. The morco, a round blue ghost creature that antagonizes children with its sharp teeth, is the Finnish version of this creature. It served as the inspiration for the Groak from the Moomin books by Tove Jansson. And the boogeyman is the topic of my video today. Which boogeymen do we have? How and why would you use them in your fantasy world? And what do they tell people about the culture that you're building? Welcome to another episode of Just in Time Worlds with your host, Marie Mullaney. If you want to support me in making more of these videos, you can hit my Ko-fi page, links down below, or you can buy my books available on Amazon. Okay, let's get cracking. First, bear in mind that many regions share the same kind of boogeyman, but with regional differences in the story and the mythology around these boogeymen. There are often common sources for these boogeymen, but sometimes the common sources are actually just myths that go back thousands of years as long as we've been telling stories to each other around the fire. If you're interested in hearing my thoughts on the origin of specific mythological creatures, leave a comment down below and I'll add it to my list of videos. But otherwise, in this video, I'll be using the versions of the myths that seem to have the most support based on internet research. So if it's different from the version you know, it's probably just a regional variation. Feel free to tell me about it in the comments below. Okay, let's talk about what boogeymen tell people about the culture you're building. So the first thing that a boogeyman does is it emphasizes what kind of behavior your people find important in children. So what are the foundations that they are trying to instill in the behavior of their children? So as an example, in Mexico, there is a boogeyman called La Llorona, who drowned her children either because they were conceived with a Spaniard or because she wanted to be with a Spaniard. The myth varies a bit. And when he spurned her, she drowned herself. And she snatches children who wander along the riverbanks, confusing them for her own, and then she drowns them in the river. This story pretty obviously emphasizes the importance of staying away from water. So what the parents are trying to do here is ensure that their children stay away from the water banks. But in Japan, you have the Aobozu, that is a blue cyclopean monk that kidnaps children who run and play in fields instead of going straight home after school. So the important message here is you're not supposed to run and play in the field after school. You should come straight home to your parents, to your chores, to your duties at home. So you can see that this monster lays a different kind of behavior in the child's upbringing. Then you have the Klude from Belgium, which is a canine demon with bare claws and green scales and bat wings, and it spawns from the cremated remains of witches and wizards, and it drags children into waterways. See, again, this is emphasizing stay away from the water. This is because water can be quite dangerous to a child, especially free-flowing waterways into which they can fall and drown. So obviously, parents would emphasize these creatures to try and get their children to stay away from the edge of waterways so that they, will be safe from drowning, whether or not these creatures actually exist. Okay, so that tells us about the kind of behavior that parents are looking to instill in children using these monsters. What else does it tell us about the culture? It also emphasizes what people in that culture are afraid of, and it tells you what they find taboo. So as an example, the Abu Rigal Masluka of Egypt is the ghost of a badly burned child who died because he did not listen to his parents. And he steals misbehaving children, cooks them, and eats them. So here you see again that it's the spirit of the dead. So we've got an emphasis on the dead coming back to life being something to fear. And it makes cannibalism a frightening thing. It emphasizes the taboo of cannibalism as a thing to fear. Then we have the Baobas in Lithuania, which is an evil spirit with spindly arms and wrinkly fingers and red eyes, and it harasses misbehaving children by pulling their hair. So in a way, this is a much lesser boogeyman because instead of, cooking you and eating you and so on, it just inflicts pain. But if you look at the way it's described, you can also see quite a lot about the culture. Red eyes are seen as a dangerous thing. Spindly arms, wrinkly fingers. These things tell you what this culture finds abhorrent in the appearance of others. Then we have Black Annis from England, who is a blue witch with iron claws that tans the skin of stolen children and wears them around her waist, which is just a lot of ick. That emphasizes the taboo around skinning people, around making leather out of people's skins. And notice the color blue here. The Finnish ghost is also blue, and quite a few of the boogeymen monsters are described as being blue. I'm not entirely sure why that is, but it might be an association with kind of asphyxiation or with water, like trying to keep kids away from water, or with emphasizing ghosts, who don't have air, and therefore the kind of blue you turn if, your airways are closed off and so on. But it does seem to be a trend that boogeymen are associated with blue, which is interesting in the context of colors that are important to your culture. Boogeymen often seem to find their way into lullabies as a means of communicating with children. And this is the case with the Cucuchi, I think I'm pronouncing that right, which is a Brazilian crocodile woman who steals children who will not go to sleep. So the lullaby in English goes something like, "Sleep, little baby, the cucucha comes to get you. Daddy went to the farm and mommy went to work." I mean, I get that lullabies, the words don't really matter, but damn, those are some dark words. Then, of course, there are some boogeymen who are really quite different. In Indonesia, the boogeyman actually helps children. So the Wewe Gombel is a female spirit that nests in palm trees. Supposedly, this is the ghost of a woman who was married to a man and she was barren. She couldn't have children. And the husband became wayward. He neglected his wife and he left her alone for long periods of time, and she lived in sorrow. One day she followed him and caught him being, adulterous, and hurt by her husband's betrayal, she became furious and killed him. And then, faced with the crime, angry neighbors gathered a mob and chased her from the village. And this, of course, created a great despair within her, and she committed suicide. After her death, her vengeful spirit became the Wewe Gombel. She doesn't hurt children. She takes children who have been abused or who are living in bad circumstances, and she takes them up into the palm trees to live with her, and she keeps them until their parents repent of their ways. And the children don't want to leave the Wewe Gombel because she treats them better than they are treated at home. So this is kind of like a reverse of the boogeyman trope, where she actually is better for the children than their home circumstances, which I found was a very interesting take on the whole legend of the boogeyman. So besides telling people about your culture, what they fear, what they find taboo, and so on, boogeymen can also be used to kind of build out your magic system. And you can see examples of this in both Anita Blake and the Dresden Files, where they use the same fairy monster, the rawhide and bloody bones from Celtic mythology. So this is sometimes regarded as a water demon that haunts deep ponds, oceans, and old marl pits. And there's this warning about it that says, keep away from the marl pit or rawhide and bloody bones will have you. I'm telling you, keeping children away from water is one of the key core components of many boogeymen. So in both Dresden Files and in Anita Blake, the rawhide and bloody bones is a fairy monster that belongs to the fairy courts and is shaped by human belief and human activity. So you can dig into that kind of layered boogeyman mythology as a part of your magic system, depending on your magic system. You can see that as well with the way that The Witcher uses Volith Mayer, or the Deathless Mother. Now, it is abundantly clear to anybody who knows Slavic folklore that Volith Mayer is supposed to be Baba Yaga, or at least is heavily drawn from the legend of Baba Yaga, who lived in a house on chicken legs and could fly using a mortar and pestle. She pushed the mortar along using the pestle, which is just the coolest way to fly ever. So if you enjoyed that exploration of boogeymen, hit the thumbs up button, and let's talk about how to design your own. So firstly, don't worry too much about whether it's real. It can be real, it can be fake, it can be something inspired by something that was real once upon a time. Think about what you want to show about your culture. What are they afraid of? So when I was designing a boogeyman, I went with a classic and said waterways. The reason why is because this was a boogeyman in the northern part of the Empire of Lumiaron, where free-flowing water is common and keeping children away from the waterways is important. My boogeyman ate the toes of children who went swimming in the waterways. Then, what does your boogeyman look like, and how do you use it within your world? So I used mine to describe what someone looks like. So if I was describing him in an urban fantasy, I would say he had a face like a troll. But do trolls exist in your world? Because this is an opportunity to bring in something unique to your world, something small but unique. And so instead of describing the person as having a face like a troll, I said he had a face like a pico, with cauliflower ears that was reminiscent of the leather flaps of the pico, and a big broken nose that was reminiscent of the yellow bulbous nose of a pico. It's worth having just that little bit of a deeper think in terms of describing someone as some kind of boogeyman that your narrating character would think about. Can you just use our world creatures? Of course you can. I could have described my dude as having a face like a troll, and most fantasy readers would have read it and nodded their heads and moved on. But you do have an opportunity here to start showing parts of your world's culture. And I use specifically this waterway aspect. If my narrating character had been from the southern part of my continent, I would probably have used a monster more like the Tatu Duende from Belize, which is a goblin that protects the forests and animals and hunts down children who play in the forests. And the reason why I would have used that monster is because that part of my world is heavily forested, and keeping children away from the forest at night is also a good reason to have a boogeyman. And so you can start showing regional differences in terms of what people are taught to fear at an early age and how they are brought up by their parents within your world. And that way you create this rich tapestry of cultures across your world based on the folklore of your world. And you don't need to create a complete depth of folklore. You don't need to go crazy. Just create a couple of boogeymen here and there that emphasize aspects of your culture that your characters would have been brought up knowing about. And those are my thoughts on boogeymen in fantasy cultures. If you enjoyed this video, hit the thumbs up button and maybe check out my video on how to create hybrid monsters in a fantasy world. Remember, I do have a Discord server if you want to connect around this or other topics. I will see you soon for another episode of Just in Time Worlds.